In June of 2024, a First Nations woman of Mi'kmaq heritage named Christina Gillis called the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for a welfare check on her daughter who struggles with mental illness. Her daughter was in distress and she hoped that law enforcement could help calm things down. But when 4 officers responded to the residence in Richmond Corner, New Brunswick, they allegedly taunted the troubled woman. Gillis later told APTN News that she approached one of the officers and asked them why they were taunting her daughter, when the reason she called them was for help de-escalating the situation. Instead of answering the question, she claimed that the officer grabbed her arm and flipped her over like a ragdoll. In her harrowing account of events, Gillis said she didn't know if she was going to survive, claiming that she felt like she was being nearly beaten to death. Her injuries were evident in a photo of her that was taken after her arrest, which shows multiple cuts and abrasions on her face. Gillis reported the incident to the authorities, and New Brunswick's Serious Incident Response Team, or CERT, announced that it was investigating the incident. The findings are unknown. Number 8. Jacqueline King. In October of 2024, a 31-year-old Kansas woman named Jacqueline King was arrested for shooting her husband while vacationing in Pensacola Beach, Florida. According to news reports, Escambia County deputies responded to a call at the Fairfield Inn Hotel, where they found King's husband suffering from a single gunshot wound. He was taken to the hospital for treatment to his injury while King was booked into county lockup on an attempted homicide charge. King no longer appears to be in custody, and the current status of the case is unclear. Number 7. Ashley Innes. 29-year-old Ashley Brianne Innes was arrested in Maricopa County, Arizona, on 2 misdemeanor drug counts in August of 2024. The arrest came about a month after she was booked into custody on a probation violation charge. 7 months before that, in January of 2024, Innes was arrested on suspicion of prescription drug possession, drug paraphernalia, possession of a narcotic drug, dangerous drug possession, and third-degree criminal trespassing. The frequently arrested woman has a criminal record dating at least as far back as 2017, when she was charged with shoplifting and failing to appear in court for a previous case. Records show that she's currently in custody as she awaits her next court date for her most recent charges. Number 6. The quickfire round. Not much is known about the following people, so we are throwing them all together into a bonus listing. Him and 2 of his compadres kidnapped and beat up a woman before dumping her in Mexico. This lady was driving while impaired, seemingly on Halloween. This guy assaulted a minor. He exposed himself to a 17-year-old male lifeguard at a public pool in Wantor, New York. This one committed assault and dating violence. And this superstar was arrested during the 2020 Labor Day riots in Portland, Oregon. Brittany Porter was arrested for a long list of offenses in Volusia County, Florida. 2 counts of alleged possession of a controlled substance without a prescription, possession of paraphernalia, driving without a license which is cancelled or suspended or revoked, felony probation violation, and knowingly giving a false report to a law enforcement officer. Also in Florida, Stephen DeLeonardis was arrested for trespassing. Is that thing real? Crystal Norris was arrested in 2024 for driving under suspension, 3rd or subsequent offense. Apparently she likes driving as much as she does facial tattoos. And lastly, I thought you should meet Tyler Newsom. He was arrested for alleged possession of marijuana drug paraphernalia. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not entirely surprised by those charges. Unlike Hector Meteor, who does seem entirely surprised. Meteor exposed himself and was arrested for indecent exposure, by the way. Number 5. Crystal Mostek. In April of 2018, a woman with multiple facial tattoos and piercings entered a 7-Eleven store in Virginia Beach and placed a paper bag on the counter. Attached to it was a note stating, "Bomb. Call 911. Emergency responders determined that the device was a smoke detector and that it did not pose any threat to anyone. But the threat alone was considered a serious crime, and the suspect, 33-year-old Crystal Mostek, was charged with threatening to bomb and possession of a hoax device. Meanwhile, her mugshot caught the attention of news outlets across the United States, including the New York Post. Post and the New York Daily News, Mostek had at least one previous mugshot which appeared on the busted newspaper website, but the nature of any past charges she faced is unclear. At her arraignment for the bomb threat, she denied the charges and pleaded not guilty. During the hearing, her lawyer said that he was looking into whether his client needed mental health treatment. Later on in the case, Mostek claimed that she didn't remember the incident and that she was on the wrong medication at the time. She was nevertheless found guilty, and in 2019 she was sentenced to a year in jail followed by indefinite probation. Authorities never revealed her alleged motive for the hoax. Number 4. Catherine Butler. On Halloween night in 2014, 26-year-old Catherine Butler of Rochester, New York, was arrested on suspicion of drunk driving twice within 3 hours in the town of Gates. Earlier that night, she had attended a so-called zombie prom party at a bar, and she was still dressed for the occasion when she was nabbed by the police. Butler's first arrest occurred at around 2 o'clock in the morning when she was pulled over for driving with no headlights. A friend picked her up from the police station after she was booked and processed, but she reportedly got back into her car and was pulled over again 3 hours later while still wearing the same costume and makeup. The second stop occurred just before 5 o'clock a.m. when a different police officer noticed Butler's vehicle swerving in and out of its designated lane. After being booked and processed yet again, she was driven home by a member of the police department. According to news reports, Butler had 2 prior convictions for driving while ability impaired, or DWAI, from 2006 and 2011. The outcome of her Halloween cases is unclear. Number 3. Justin Harris Reynolds. Late one night in June of 2019, a sheriff's deputy in Indian River County, Florida, spotted a seemingly intoxicated man staggering along Old Dixie Highway in Vero Beach. Worried that the man would walk into the road and get hurt, the deputy stopped to check on him. Identified by law enforcement as 31-year-old Justin Harris Reynolds, the man told the deputy that he was walking home from a nearby bar because he didn't want to drive intoxicated. Unwilling to allow Reynolds to continue walking for safety reasons, the deputy allowed him to call his girlfriend for a ride and waited with him until she arrived to pick him up. Reynolds reportedly began to behave erratically, prompting the deputy to call for backup. He was still acting out of control when another deputy arrived, prompting law enforcement's decision to arrest him. When they attempted to take Reynolds into custody, he resisted and a struggle ensued. He was still yelling at and threatening officers upon arriving at a local hospital, and a deputy's efforts to calm him down only seemed to make him even more irate. Reynolds was accused of kicking the deputy, and the decision was made to restrain him to a hospital bed. Hospital staff determined that the suspect's blood alcohol content was very high, but they medically cleared him and he was booked into custody on charges of battery on a law enforcement officer, disorderly intoxication, and resisting arrest without violence. He later apologized for his behavior and acknowledged the wrongfulness of his actions. Court records show that Reynolds pleaded no contest to the disorderly intoxication and resisting arrest charges. The battery on a law enforcement officer charge was dropped and he was sentenced to 90 days in jail. Number 2. David Irizarry Arroyo. In early February of 2024, 30-year-old David Ahmed Irizarry Arroyo was featured in Fox News' Mugshots of the Week, following his arrest for failing to show up for a scheduled court hearing in relation to a previous case. The previous case stemmed from his conviction in November of 2023 for felony threats of violence with reckless disregard for pointing a pellet gun at his ex-boyfriend. As a result, Irizarry Arroyo received a stay of imposition, sparing him from prison time. Additionally, the judge dropped a domestic violence charge. 40 days later, a probation violation charge was filed against Irizarry Arroyo. He was a no-show in court and an arrest warrant was issued. Following his arrest in February 2024, he was released from jail without bail. Just 2 weeks later, he was arrested for yet another probation violation. In addition to Irizarry Arroyo's arrests in early 2024, records show that another warrant was issued in August of 2024. He does not appear to be in custody at this time, leaving the current status of the case unclear. We have our previous release on the topic lined up for you right after number 1, so stick around if you haven't seen that one yet. Number 1. Skylar Mead. During the early hours one morning in March of 2024, Idaho Department of Correction inmate Skylar Mead and an armed accomplice escaped from custody at St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center in Boise. Mead, a known white supremacist gang member, managed to slip away when his co-conspirator opened fire on corrections officers. At the time, he was already serving a 20-year sentence for shooting at a Twin Falls sheriff's sergeant during a high-speed chase in 2017. His criminal history dates at least as far back as 2010 and includes prior convictions for grand theft, drug-related counts, assault and gun charges. After Mead's escape from the hospital, prosecutors were determined to make sure that he would never see freedom again. Describing him as a career criminal, they urged the court to understand that Mead intended to harm people from the moment he conceived his plan to escape. Rather than go to trial, Mead ended up pleading guilty to escape by one charged, convicted or on probation for a felony and 2 other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison to be served concurrently to his 20-year term. Former child actor Shaun Weiss was arrested on January the 26th of 2020 in Marysville, California, for residential burglary while being under the influence of methamphetamine. Weiss was best known for playing hockey goalie Greg Goldberg in the Mighty Ducks movies in the 1990s. The 2020 arrest produced a mugshot that went viral. Weiss looked disheveled and strung out, with many arguing that his appearance was that of a man much older than in his early 40s, and a far cry from how he'd been remembered by those familiar with his work. The arrest was not Weiss's first. He was previously taken into custody for public intoxication in the early hours of August the 4th of 2018 by Oroville law enforcement. Weiss was part of a group said to have been behaving erratically with flashlights near a closed building complex on the 1700 block of Oro Dam Boulevard. That mugshot also attracted media attention as it documented the man's worsening condition. In July of 2017, Weiss was arrested for petty theft and sentenced to 150 days in Los Angeles County Jail, but ended up spending less than 2 weeks due to overcrowding. Within days, on August the 4th of 2017, the former child actor was arrested again in Burbank and charged with methamphetamine possession. He spent 90 days in jail. Updates on Weiss from 2023 indicated that he was 3 years sober and had begun helping others struggling with addiction, in addition to launching a career in stand-up comedy. He was quoted as telling a media outlet, "Unfortunately, I had to suffer to get to this spot, but I live like my life is literally kind of like heaven on earth now." Number 7. James Jenner. 50-year-old James Jenner was arrested by Los Angeles police on August the 14th of 2023 after he was found with his girlfriend's body inside a home on the 1600 block of Golden Arrow Drive near Maryland Parkway and Desert Inn Road. The victim, 27-year-old Selena Rebolts, had suffered fatal gunshot wounds. A witness told the police that he'd overheard Jenner fighting with Rebolts and threatening her, "I'll put 3 in you if you don't shut up." The victim's mother was reported to have intervened in the fight, but Jenner, a crystal methamphetamine user known for his violent temper, threatened to hurt her if she didn't go away. The witness left the house to go gambling and, upon returning, found Rebolts with a bullet hole in her chest. Jenner allegedly told the witness, "I killed the woman I loved," but explained the situation as an accident that had occurred while he was playing with his gun. In the aftermath, Jenner placed the body in the attic and intended to move it in a rental car to prevent the foul odor from tainting his car. Jenner faced charges of murder with a deadly weapon and unlawful possession of a firearm. His arrest produced a mugshot that attracted considerable attention online. Jenner had a number of odd tattoos that included a pair of thick glasses framing his eyes, animal horns that ran from his temples to the top of his head, and a dark tattoo that covered the entire lower half of his face. The man's criminal past in Clark County listed 5 felony convictions and a number of domestic violence cases. Information released to the media in the fall of 2023 revealed that Jenner had waived his right to a preliminary hearing. Number 6. James Sutton. On February the 28th of 2022, the Murray River Police District in Australia posted a photo of wanted man James Sutton to their Facebook, asking for the public's help in locating him. 24-year-old Sutton was on the run after missing a court date for charges of property damage and domestic assault. The post drew a number of tongue-in-cheek comments from netizens, sparked by the fact that the authorities were asking for assistance in spite of Sutton's extremely identifiable features. Sutton's face was covered in a continuous mask-like tattoo that outlined the word beast in large letters on his forehead. One of the Facebook users commenting on the police's post wrote, "I'm gonna need a description if you want my help to find him." While on the run, Sutton changed his Facebook profile picture to one in which the lower half of his face was covered. The move was met with more unavoidable sarcasm by Facebook users, with one comment reading, "Cops won't even recognize you now, bruh." Sutton was eventually taken into custody in October after spending about 2 weeks on the run. Number 5. Ari Patterson. In late 2014, Ari Patterson was arrested in Hallandale, Florida on a misdemeanor theft charge, with the ensuing mugshot showing him grimacing under apparent discomfort while having a yellow substance on his face. When the photo began circulating online, there was a great deal of mystery as to what covered 36-year-old Patterson's face, with theories including egg, mustard, and pudding. However, a spokesperson for the Broward County Sheriff's Office revealed that it was actually Sabre pepper foam. It was used on Patterson because he'd refused to comply during the booking process. The spokesperson noted that the foam is similar to pepper spray, but it doesn't shoot as far, which is useful in close quarters such as a jail. Patterson became cooperative after being sprayed, but refused to be treated or decontaminated, which resulted in the attention-gripping mugshot. Number 4. Tracy Mabb. Florida woman Tracy Mabb was arrested in the summer of 2012 after she'd exposed herself to motorists at an intersection in Pompano Beach. The authorities were called and a deputy reported witnessing 35-year-old Mabb pull her long shirt up and intentionally exposing her entire body in a completely vulgar and indecent manner. Upon being taken into custody, the woman reportedly told an officer that she didn't give an F about her behavior. She was transported to Broward County Jail and charged with indecent exposure, for which she was held on a $600 bail. Mabb was also charged with petty theft following an incident which had occurred in April. As her processing photo was being taken, Mabb had an outburst that was captured by the camera. She started crying profusely, with the resulting mugshot showing the woman with teary eyes and her mouth opened wide. The photo went viral and was picked up by multiple media outlets. Mabb's reaction to her crime was markedly different when she appeared in court in front of Judge John Hurley, as the woman started laughing while she heard the incident report. Number 3. Rafael Vargas Olvera. On the evening of August the 25th of 2022, Arizona man Rafael Vargas Olvera was at a Glendale home near 69th Avenue and Bethany Home Road, where his sister reported he'd been acting crazy. She tried to call her and Rafael's father, 48-year-old Antonio, about half an hour after leaving the home. 26-year-old Rafael answered the phone instead to say that he'd gunned down their father. His family rushed to the scene to try and get him to come out of the house. During a 911 call, Rafael claimed that he'd shot Antonio in self-defense because the man had burst into his bedroom and tried to stab him. Rafael refused to leave the home as ordered by responding police officers, and a SWAT team was called to assist with the arrest. As the officers surrounded the house, Rafael started shooting at them, forcing them to return fire. Body cam footage would show several of the suspects' bullets hit the SWAT truck where some members of the tactical team had taken cover. Rafael had also shot at a drone that the police had sent in to assess the situation. The standoff lasted for several hours before Rafael emerged carrying a rifle and tried to leave the home through the backyard. SWAT officers positioned on the roof shot the man, forcing him to drop his weapon and surrender. A K-9 unit was then sent into the backyard, and Officers followed suit. The canine tore into Raphael's face, mangling his nose. The suspect was taken to a local hospital in critical condition, but he survived, and the disfiguring damage inflicted by the police dog was visible in his mugshot. Raphael faced several felony charges, including second-degree murder, aggravated assault, and attempted murder of a police officer. Number 2. Matthew Ezekiel Stager. After being released from the Federal Correctional Complex in Petersburg, Virginia, in February of 2018, Matthew Ezekiel Stager was meant to check into the Austin Transitional Center in Del Valle, Texas. He failed to reach the halfway house, however, and went on the run after federal authorities had lost sight of him at the airport. As per court records, 44-year-old Stager was an admitted witch from North Carolina, and as shown in his mugshot, had numerous facial tattoos that were reportedly related to the practice. He was also a registered offender. In 1999, he was convicted in connection to his relationship with a teenager, whom he'd gotten pregnant after continually abusing her for years. He was later convicted in Texas for failing to register as an offender after crossing state lines. Following his February flight from the law, Stager was recaptured in Washington, D.C., where he'd been spotted by 2 Metropolitan Police officers. After number 1, we'll tune up our releases about when face tattoos go wrong. Stick around if you'd like to watch those as well still. Number 1. Nicholas Sherman. On June the 4th of 2017, law enforcement in Sullivan, New York, was called to an address on Perryville Road after homeowners reported an intoxicated man on their property. The man, who'd allegedly refused to leave, was driven to the address by 31-year-old Nicholas Sherman. Responding officers found that Sherman's face was covered in silver makeup that featured black streaks extended from the corners of his mouth. The man revealed that he was on his way back from the village of Chittenango, the birthplace of the wonderful Wizard of Oz author Lyman Frank Baum. Every year the village held a festival with parades and performances in celebration of the story. Sherman had reportedly been hired to play the Tin Man during the event. The police, however, found that Sherman's blood alcohol content was 0.19, more than twice the legal limit. Sherman was arrested for aggravated DWI, and he was processed at a local jail while he was still wearing the Tin Man makeup. It resulted in a peculiar photo which attracted attention online and for which many netizens required further explanation.
Number 11. Shaylin Moran. On New Year's Day 2020, shortly after announcing their engagement on social media, 24-year-old Jack Doherty and his 18-year-old partner gunned down a woman in Rhode Island. Doherty and his fiancée, Shaylin Moran, targeted 54-year-old Cheryl Smith, the mother of Moran's ex-boyfriend, Leonard Trofield. He was reportedly at the residence when the shooting occurred but wasn't hurt. Smith was found with multiple gunshot wounds to her chest, believed to have been inflicted with a 3D printed handgun, and was later pronounced dead at a local hospital. The motive remained a matter of speculation. It could have been a failed drug robbery, as the police were seen carrying several cannabis plants out of Smith's home, and Moran had professed her love of the substance on social media. Smith might have also been killed in retaliation to the domestic abuse that Moran had allegedly suffered at Trofield's hands. After the killing, Doherty and Moran, who had gun sight tattooed on her face, posted photos on social media, one of which boasted, "We some fighters and some shooters." The pair were later arrested at a Hampton Inn and held on first-degree murder charges. Number 10. Kelsey Carter. In early 2019, Los Angeles-based musician Kelsey Carter shocked her Instagram followers by announcing she'd gotten a tattoo of One Direction star Harry Styles on her face. 24-year-old Carter posted a photo showing Styles' face on her cheek, which rapidly became viral and received extensive media coverage. The attention was focused on the outrageous tattoo itself, but also on Carter's new single. In April of 2018, she was going through a hard time after her relationship had ended and wrote a song called Harry, inspired by the pop star. It was shelved for a few months and then released along with the announcement of the tattoo. A few days later, in a video entitled How I rocked the entire world for $300. Carter revealed that the tattoo was only temporary and had been done with the help of a makeup artist. She admitted that it was simply meant to garner attention to the song. While a number of users praised the move and called it brilliant marketing, the vast majority condemned the hoax, some even referring to it as a crime. Number 9. Puck Karika. In 2019, the wife of New Zealand man Puck Karika started a crowdfunding page that would help him pay for his college education and aspirations of becoming a personal trainer. It was meant to support the man's attempt to turn his life around after his massive face tattoo reportedly prevented him from getting a job. 31-year-old Karika was part of the Mongrel Mob, one of the country's most feared biker gangs. For over a decade, he had the word notorious written in the gang's red and black colors, tattooed on most of his face, in a manner that resembled a face mask. Karika was imprisoned twice and overcame a methamphetamine addiction while locked up. In an interview with the newspaper that reported on his story, he admitted that he will always be a mobster, but added that he tried to encourage others towards improving their condition. Yet, even after turning away from a criminal lifestyle and becoming part of a rugby team, Karika still found it hard to get work. While many were sympathetic to his plight and even donated to the page, others mocked his attempts at bettering his life, including rapper 50 Cent. He posted a picture of Karika and concluded his caption with, "I wonder why he can't get a job." Number 8. Daryl Gio. In January of 2015, New Orleans man Daryl Gio was sentenced to 30 years in prison for cumulative criminal acts, including a violent carjacking that had occurred in November of 2013. In a grocery parking lot in Metairie, he attacked a 68-year-old woman with a broken bottle and forced her out of her Chevrolet Cavalier. The victim was knocked to the ground and sustained injuries to her head and arm from being struck with the bottle. A few hours later, he attempted to rob an 18-year-old French Quartet resident as she walked in the 900 block of Chartres Street. The first victim's car was found less than a mile from where Gio lived. He was easily identifiable due to the word red rum, a reverse spelling for murder, tattooed in capitals across his forehead. Gio was arrested a few days later after he was spotted by a police officer. He ultimately pled guilty to the carjacking and attempted first-degree robbery. Number 7. Unnamed Welshman. In 2015, a man from Swansea, South Wales, went to a bachelor party in Blackpool, where after a night of drinking, he awoke to find some markings on his face. They were in the form of a pair of glasses, with the misspelled name of the Ray-Ban brand written on the side. At first, the unnamed man, reported as being in his 50s, believed that someone had used a marker to draw the glasses on him. However, he subsequently discovered that they wouldn't come off no matter how hard he tried. He had no recollection of getting the tattoo, which he suspected had likely been the result of a drunken deer. Upon returning home, in spite of the stares he'd get, he decided not to have the tattoo removed. However, after being mocked at a pub, he started thinking about his friends and family. He didn't want them to get embarrassed upon being seen with him in public and decided to get rid of the glasses. He visited a laser clinic and after a 6-session treatment, he was free of his drunken mistake. Number 6. Camprasong Tamavong. On March the 7th of 2016, police in Fresno, California took 33-year-old Camprasong Tamavong into custody following a traffic stop. Tamavong's heavily tattooed face featured the word Gucci written on his forehead, as well as a pattern that covered his entire head, tears below his eyes, blackened lips, and the words "Speak no evil" inked beneath his nose in the shape of a mustache. The officer that spotted him found that Tamavong was on probation and a member of the Laos Blood Gang. He requested assistance with interviewing him from the Southeast Violent Crime Impact Team. They researched Tamavong to find out his address and then conducted a search of his Fresno residence. Inside, they found SWAT tactical gear, a semi-automatic handgun, and a semi-automatic rifle. They also found drug paraphernalia and a marijuana grow, for which he didn't have a license, and which consisted of 38 plants. Tamavong was arrested on numerous felony charges, including cultivation of marijuana and felon in possession of a firearm. Number 5. Christopher Breaker. In August of 2017, Texas law enforcement arrested 25-year-old Christopher Breaker for robbing a Walgreens in Cyprus. They were able to quickly identify and locate Breaker due to the black streaks tattooed on his face, which contoured his eyes and ran down his cheeks, nose, and cheekbones. Witnesses from the store told officers the breaker had been behaving strangely and eating food right off the shelves. He then jumped over the pharmacy's counter, flashed a knife, and then started hitting the back door with a fire extinguisher. He eventually fled through the front entrance and left behind the donuts that he'd attempted to steal. A witness who'd recognized Breaker's facial artwork from a previous mugshot pointed the police in the right direction. He was charged with aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon, which is a second-degree felony. Number 4. Adam Roberts. In March of 2013, an Illinois man was arrested for a string of robberies in his southwestern hometown of Godfrey. 24-year-old Roberts was instantly recognizable due to his full-face skeleton tattoo. The police suspected that during the previous month, Roberts and an accomplice had stolen from as many as 28 storage units and then sold the goods to unsuspecting members of the public. One officer referred to Roberts' tattoo as the oddest thing he'd seen in over 2 decades of law enforcement. The suspect was held on a $60,000 bond. His distinctive artwork made it easier for the police to track down the items that he'd sold, which included, among others, televisions, fishing equipment, a refrigerator, and paintings. Number 3. Michael Vine. In June of 2018, South Carolina man Michael Vine was involved in a car crash in the city of Greenville. Vine, who had a handgun tattooed on his forehead, was ironically federally prohibited from carrying a firearm. As he exited the vehicle, the city's firefighters spotted him throwing something in the grass. They discovered that the item was a fully loaded Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver. Vine was arrested and charged with driving too fast, driving on a suspended license, and unlawful carrying of a firearm. Number 2. William and Lawrence Bottoms. In August of 2019, a heavily tattooed man was found guilty of a double homicide, which had occurred in East Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in 2017. His legal defense team had feared that a jury would judge William Bottoms Jr. because of his numerous face tattoos that included a skeletal smile on his mouth, an eye in the middle of his forehead, a devil with the eyes crossed out on his chin, and many others. In early June, according to his then-girlfriend, she and Bottoms were in the same car with 23-year-old Dedrick Dwayne Williams and Mohammed S. Hussein, aged 29. They'd reportedly bought some heroin. Bottoms, sitting in the front passenger seat, then became paranoid from the drugs. At around 3 a.m., without warning or provocation, he shot Williams and Hussein as they sat in the back seat. Both victims were shot multiple times in the head. They were then abandoned in a rural area along with the vehicle and covered with a sheet that matched others owned by Bottoms. The jury deliberated for about an hour before finding him guilty, and he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. A few months before he was convicted, his twin brother Lawrence was fatally shot by deputies in Mississippi. They were trying to serve him a high-risk warrant for illegal firearm possession when Lawrence pulled out a gun and pointed it at them. Lawrence also had abundant facial ink that included a skull and bones on his chin, a crown of thorns, tribal markings on the cheeks, and, like his brother, a skeleton mouth. Number 1. Michael Mann. In 2018, a Cincinnati man with extensive facial tattoos was arrested for kidnapping in what was his 54th run-in with the law. 35-year-old Michael Mann's artwork included, among others, a large dollar sign over his eye, as well as lip marks and a heavily tattooed left ear. In October, he entered a check cashing store and held a woman against her will, unless her sister returned with $100. The police responded to the 911 call and took him into custody. Earlier in the year, he was arrested on domestic violence and aggravated burglary charges. He crawled into the home of his child's mother through an open window and proceeded to choke and assault her. Mann's extensive record featured arrests for burglary, robbery, and drug possession. For his most recent criminal offense, he was held on a bond set at $200,000.
Number 8. Troy Fornaciari. In April of 2019, a leading figure of the Finks, an outlaw motorcycle club from Australia, vowed to turn his life around and have his face tattoos removed as he stood accused on multiple charges, including beating a fellow biker. In 2017, Troy Fornaciari, aged 35, had lent his Harley-Davidson to Jacob Narainen. The latter drove the motorcycle down Princess Highway but crashed it and sustained injuries in the process. Fornicchiari went to the scene of the accident and, enraged that his motorcycle had been damaged, began bashing Narayanan in the head. Paramedics had already arrived at the scene by that time, and they tried to intervene, with one of them reportedly telling the biker that his friend's injuries were the priority and not his damaged property. Fornicchiari wouldn't relent, and the paramedics locked themselves inside the ambulance as they waited for law enforcement. Officers reportedly found Fornicchiari agitatedly pacing near the emergency vehicle. He was arrested and charged with affray. In February of the following year, the biker was arrested again at the Finks North Wollongong clubhouse, where he was found to be in possession of an unlicensed firearm. As Fornicchiari's trial progressed, the father of two pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including the previous attack on Narayanan, as well as the firearm charge. His defense team told the court that his behavior stemmed from mental health problems and a traumatic upbringing, adding that he was committed to turning his life around, with the first step in that direction being the removal of his face tattoos. They included, among others, the words "tough luck," one on each eyelid, "in God's hands" on his cheek, and, rather ironically, "not guilty" on his cheek. Fornicchiari was eventually sentenced to 3 years and 6 months in prison. Number 7. Daniel Lloyd Selovich. In late 2019, a female resident of Fairbanks, Alaska, began warning women on social media that a dangerous member of the community had returned. Daniel Lloyd Selovich, a man in his early 40s with a history of brutally abusing women, had been spotted at a McDonald's in the city. The woman took photos of him as he sat in the restaurant and openly questioned why he'd come back to Alaska. Selovich, whose face was heavily tattooed with Maori-style artwork, had legally changed his name to Pirate in 2013. Then in September of 2015, he went to Fairbanks Airport and picked up a woman he'd met online in an adult chat group. Christy Buchanan, aged 43, was taken via a charter flight to Selovich's remote cabin in the Manly Hot Springs area. It was there that he held the woman captive for 5 weeks, during the course of which he ruthlessly abused and assaulted her on a daily basis. Selovich tied Buchanan to a roof beam and put a noose around her neck. He bit, punched and kicked the woman, hit her with a belt, held a knife to her throat, and threatened to cut her face off. At night, he tied himself to Buchanan with duct tape so that she wouldn't escape. She was eventually able to contact her friends on Facebook and ask them for help. The following day, November the 8th, Alaska state troopers were sent to the cabin and they airlifted her to safety. Selovich was charged with kidnapping, as well as felony and misdemeanor assault. His court date was set for August of 2016, but the case was dropped after Buchanan died from unrelated causes in July of that same year. However, Selovich wasn't released, but extradited to Nevada, where DNA evidence had linked him to the 2004 kidnapping, assault, and battery of a woman whose room he'd broken into at the Ambassador East Motel on Fremont Street, Las Vegas. He was sentenced to up to 5 years for the crime. Number 6. Cody Keenan. In November of 2019, law enforcement in Waikato, New Zealand, released a mugshot of Cody Keenan, a 28-year-old fugitive with a tattoo that read "Mighty Mongrel Mob" and stretched from ear to ear on the lower half of his face. As the mugshot began to circulate online, a number of commenters reacting to his tattoo mocked it and pointed out how recognizable Keenan was because of it. Even so, the reputed gang member had a history of successfully avoiding capture about a year prior, as the police were pursuing him on an active warrant stemming from charges of failing to appear in court. He evaded them by abandoning his van and jumping into the Waiho River. The waters were particularly turbulent around that time due to recent rainfall, but Keenan survived. He was apprehended a few days later upon crashing his car during a police chase. In 2019, shortly after his mugshot had been released to the public, the face-tattooed criminal was taken into custody once again. Number 5. Jesse Thornhill. In July of 2010, police in Tulsa, Oklahoma, responded to the call of a late-night altercation. Officers arrived to the location and were told that a resident had tried to run over his landlady with his '96 Ford Windstar van. The suspect was identified as 28-year-old Jesse Thornhill, who was easily recognizable due to his extensive cosmetic modifications. He had subdermal implants of horns on his skull, scarified patterns on his face, and piercings running transversely atop his shaved head. Among Thornhill's most striking features were also his jet black tattooed eyebrows. He'd had an argument with his landlady and reportedly tried to hit her with his car, but missed as she was able to jump out of its path. He was apprehended a few hours after the incident, and an arrest sheet, which was later posted online, mentioned a few of his modifications while also describing him as a heavy metal fan. Thornhill was held at the Tulsa County Jail overnight before he was released on a $10,000 bond. Number 4. Randy Petersilge. In April of 2019, a Florida man whose face was covered in tattoos consisting of tribal-style streaks and skeleton features was arrested for murder on the same day that he'd been released from federal prison. At the time, 51-year-old Randy Petersilge had just finished serving a term on a felon in possession of a firearm conviction. The killing to which he'd been connected had taken place over 18 years prior, in 2001. Simon Clark, a man in his early 40s, was found beaten to death at a construction site in Newport Richey. Petersilge was investigated as a suspect, but the evidence was deemed insufficient to formally charge him. No arrests were made, and the case of Clark's violent killing went cold. In the years that followed, Petersilge was convicted in Florida for aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, battery on a law enforcement officer, grand theft, and burglary. While executing his latest sentence for firearm possession, the investigation into Clark's murder was reopened. The authorities were able to build a stronger case against the face tattooed offender, which led to him being indicted in January of 2018. Number 3. Mark Kropp. In 2017, a man from New Zealand made international headlines through a desperate plea for work posted on social media, in which he claimed that his large face tattoo and past criminal convictions had left him unable to find a job. 19-year-old Mark Kropp had "Devastate" in thick black letters covering the entire lower half of his face. He'd gotten the massive tattoo while incarcerated and serving a 2-year sentence for armed robbery. The artwork, reported to represent Kropp's nickname, was designed by his brother. It was initially meant to be a small piece along the jawline, but as Kropp later told a media outlet, he got carried away after drinking a prison-made brew consisting of fermented apples, sugar, and bread. As reports of his struggle went viral, Kropp was inundated with dozens of job offers and eventually found employment. The Sacred Laser Tattoo Removal Studio in Kingsland offered to remove the Devastate piece for free, and according to updates on the matter, Kropp had begun the first round of laser treatment. Number 2. Sarah Jane Sinclair. While talking to a media outlet in September of 2021, a British woman revealed that she'd been subjected to online abuse because of her face tattoos. According to mother of one Sarah Jane Sinclair from Harlow, Essex, she'd developed a tattoo addiction after getting her first artwork when she was in her late teens. Sinclair intended to be fully covered in tattoos and by her mid-20s had already progressed considerably in that regard. She had 9 tattoos on her face alone, including a mandala design on her forehead, her daughter's name on her cheekbone, as well as the phrases "stand out" and "be original" on her cheek. Regarding her presence on social media, Sinclair reported, "75% of what I get is hate," with commenters saying that she wouldn't be able to get a job or that she'd permanently ruined her face. Even though she admitted that the negative attention sometimes affected her, Sinclair was committed to getting more tattoos, claiming that the only one she regretted wasn't located on her face, but on her buttock. It was the name of a man for whom Sinclair had fallen after they'd been dating for about 2 weeks. Unfortunately, she then found out that he'd been seeing another woman at the same time. Number 1. Michael Campbell. In October of 2021, a man whom the Smoking Gun website described as the world's scariest perp was arrested and faced life in prison for trying to assault a woman as she slept beside her boyfriend. 46-year-old Michael Campbell was a known predator who'd already been registered in law enforcement databases for a similar attack that had occurred in Denver, Colorado in 1995. In the latest incident, which took place at a property in Greene County, Missouri, Campbell had pulled down the woman's pants and underwear while her boyfriend was asleep next to her. The man then woke up and chased Campbell, who fled the scene on a blue bicycle. The victim and witnesses to the chase described the attacker as a man with many face tattoos. Aside from a large pentagram in the center of his forehead and some Celtic knots, Campbell's face was largely blackened with tattoo ink. He also had a bow tie design on his neck and a pit bull below it. Police officers later found him riding on a freshly painted gold bicycle, which, on closer inspection, was revealed to have blue paint underneath. He was taken into custody and held on a $100,000 bond. When questioned about the attack, Campbell defended his actions by claiming that the woman had made advances towards him and adding that he'd turned her down because a curfew was in effect. His trial is ongoing, but considering his extensive criminal history, Campbell may end up spending the rest of his life behind bars.
Number 9. Melira Perez. In December of 2016, a woman from Boynton Beach, Florida, was arrested after shooting a man near Green Acres and engaging the police in a high-speed chase in West Palm Beach. 23-year-old Melira Perez had approached a porch where 28-year-old Armando Lopez and a relative were sitting. She held them at gunpoint, robbed them, and then fatally shot Lopez. A week before the shooting, he'd reportedly been kidnapped and beaten, an incident believed to have been a form of retaliation for him selling guns in the area. After the shooting, Perez then fled the scene. The woman, whose facial tattoos included an eye in the middle of the forehead and the word "fame" above her brow, was found on December the 7th. She drove off in a Nissan Altima, ignoring officers' commands and leading them on a chase in which speeds of up to 100 miles per hour were recorded. She then parked on Pine Abbey Drive S and placed her backpack under the seat before she got out and tried to hide. The police took her in without incident and found weapons, including the gun used to shoot Lopez, as well as a large amount of drugs in her possession. Aside from the murder weapon, detectives discovered traces of the victim's blood in the rental car that Perez had been driving. Surveillance footage and cell phone location data also placed her at the scene, in addition to the eyewitness reports. In 2020, Perez was sentenced to 40 years after pleading guilty to second-degree murder. Number 8. Anthony Ward. In 2018, Ohio law enforcement was looking for 45-year-old Anthony Ward, known as Popeye, in connection with a series of break-ins that had occurred in the Adams and Brown counties. The police decided to post his picture on Facebook, and because of his distinctive face tattoos, Ward was apprehended within 8 hours. Ward's artwork partially covered his skull, but the feature that made him instantly recognizable was a tattoo reminiscent of Hannibal Lecter's face mask from the Silence of the Lambs movie. It covered half his face, starting from above the tip of the nose and stretching from ear to ear. Ward was held at the Clement County Jail on charges that included breaking and entering, theft, and receiving stolen property. It wasn't Ward's first run-in with the law. A year prior, he'd been accused of trying to entice an underage girl to get into his truck in Springsboro. In court, the girl stated she was afraid she'd never see her family again and promptly slammed the door in his face. Ward and his lawyers defended the accusation by claiming that he'd only been looking to make a living by plowing people's driveways in the area. His lawyers added that people always assumed the worst of him because of his terrifying tattoos, which he'd gotten in prison and was saving money to have removed. The jury deliberated for half an hour and Ward was acquitted. Number 7. Dion Hulse. In October of 2011, authorities in Walsall, England, spotted a group of men trying to tie down pieces of metal to a Ford Transit. After his accomplices had fled, 29-year-old Dion Hulse, whose entire face was emblazoned by a skull tattoo, was left standing by the vehicle. The police realized that the frames were actually market stalls, stolen from Brown Hills Market, to be sold as scrap metal. There were 7 of them, each worth the equivalent of nearly $700. Hulse, who called himself Mad Dog, made a full confession and admitted to helping the men load the stalls into the vehicle, adding that he'd planned to use the money to cover a cannabis debt. In July of the previous year, the police had seized the drugs from him during a raid. According to his defense, Hulse had been holding the cannabis for a friend while he was on holiday. It was that same friend who'd allegedly pressured him into helping steal the frames so that he could restore his stash. Hulse was ultimately spared jail time for both the theft and the previous drug possession, receiving instead a suspended sentence of 12 months. Hulse had achieved some notoriety after an appearance on The Jeremy Kyle Show. He had been volunteered for the show by his then-girlfriend for a segment called "How Could My Boyfriend Destroy His Own Face?" After failing a lie detector test in which he was asked if he'd slept with other women, the host told him, "You are a liar and a cheat, and you look ridiculous." Number 6. Robert Michael. After an attempted car theft, police in Jackson County, Missouri were able to quickly track down Robert Michael on account of his extensive face and neck tattoos. In addition to black tribal streaks that ran over his eyes, Michael also had an automatic rifle on his neck. He'd entered a church in Oak Grove and asked the pastor for a lift to the nearby city of Independence. While reluctant at first, the clergyman eventually accepted after Michael had told him that he had family problems. While the car was parked outside of a home, he twice tried to grab the keys out of the ignition. On the second failed attempt, the pastor assumed control of the vehicle, hoping he'd be able to drive away. It was at that moment that Michael brandished a knife and demanded his wallet. The pastor abandoned his truck and ran away. He flagged down a passing motorist who alerted the police and subsequently gave the authorities a description of his attacker. He was arrested a short time later and charged with first-degree attempted robbery. Number 5. Corey Schmidt. By the time of his arrest in February of 2010, Corey Schmidt was already known to law enforcement in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. It marked the 5th time that 29-year-old Schmidt was arrested for drunk driving since his first offense in 2004. In the latest incident, his blood alcohol level was nearly 4 times greater than the legal driving limit. Aside from his drunk driving, Schmidt was also known to locals because of his extensive face tattoos. His collection featured the phrase, "Love kills slow," above a skull and crossbones on his neck, with spider webs on each side. One of the most unusual choices of artwork was the dots over his eyebrows, with a second set of eyebrows tattooed just above them. After he was apprehended for the 5th time, Smith became belligerent in the back of the patrol car. Officers used pepper spray on him as he started slamming his head on the back seat. When considering his record, a judge took away his license for 40 months, ordered him to maintain complete sobriety, and submit to routine urine tests. Smith also had to spend 10 months in jail under a work release program. Number 4. Donald Murray. In late 2019, Donald Murray led Indiana police on a high-speed chase after they attempted to pull him over for driving without any lights on his vehicle. The pursuit ended with 38-year-old Murray crashing his car into a tree and then fleeing on foot. He didn't avoid the police for long as he was easily identifiable by his array of face tattoos, one of which was the word Playboy on the side of his face and, quite ironically, Crime Pays on his forehead. The incident was featured on an episode of Live PD, and Murray was arrested shortly afterwards. Only a few months later, Murray was back in jail again for engaging the Terre Haute Police Department on a short chase. From his latest criminal offense, Murray faced charges of auto theft, reckless driving, methamphetamine possession, and resisting law enforcement. Number 3. Matthew Joseph Medlin. In 2020, an Oregon man with extensive face tattoos was arrested by the police as he was trying to rob a snack shack at a railway station. 36-year-old Matthew Joseph Medlin fled the scene and tried to hide in a nearby supermarket. He was confronted by the pursuing officers because the storage room he'd sought refuge in only had one exit. Medlin reached under his jacket and threatened to shoot the officers, but was tasered in response. It was subsequently revealed that he had no gun on him. The police discovered that Medlin had been in and out of jail for nearly 2 decades. During this time, his mugshots showed a progression of his face ink, which gradually came to include menacing pointed eyebrows and 4 tears on his cheeks. His criminal record featured, among others, a conviction on burglary and assault charges in 2013, and escaping from jail only a few days prior to his release in May of 2014. Number 1. Morgan Joyce Vaughn. On April the 24th of 2017, South Carolina resident Morgan Joyce Vaughn and an accomplice engaged a SWAT team in a standoff following a kidnapping and robbery at her Lancaster County home. Vaughn and Jonathan Robinson, both in their 20s, were present at the residence along with several other people. An unnamed man whom Vaughn had invited over was held by Robinson at gunpoint. The woman demanded his money and cell phone, threatening him with an ashtray. Before the pair let him go, Vaughn reportedly smashed his cell phone. The man went to one of the neighbors who phoned the police. 3 deputies arrived and demanded the occupants leave the house. Several complied, but Vaughn, Robinson, and a second unidentified woman refused to do so. A SWAT team and a crisis negotiator were called to the scene. They attempted unsuccessfully to talk them out of the home for several hours. The SWAT team then went in and managed to bring them into custody without the exchange of gunfire. They found a handgun and ammunition inside, as well as a considerable sum of money on Robinson's person. Both were arrested on kidnapping and armed robbery charges, among others. Vaughn's mugshot subsequently became viral online and was described by some commenters as demonic or nightmare fuel. She had tattoos on her face and neck, dark lipstick, and the whites of her eyes were completely blackened. A TV station referred to her mugshot as something that would haunt viewers' dreams. A few years earlier, in 2015, Vaughn had made local news thanking York County police officers for helping deliver her daughter when she was unable to reach the hospital in time. Her eyes and much of her face wasn't tattooed at the time.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather get a teardrop tattoo or spend a month in a maximum security prison, and why? Let us know in the comments section below.